You didn't have a dramatic childhood. Nobody would describe it that way. There was a roof, there was food. There were probably people who loved you in whatever way they knew how. And if you tried to explain to someone why you carry what you carry, you would probably stop halfway through and say, "It wasn't that bad. Other people had it worse." And that sentence right there, that minimizing, that immediate deflection away from your own experience, that is exactly what we are talking about today. Something was asked of you as a child that should never have been asked of a child. And you said yes. Not with your words, with your whole nervous system, with your behavior, with the way you learned to make yourself smaller or more useful, or completely invisible, depending on what the room needed from you that day. You learned early that the adults around you needed something. Stability, calm, someone who would not add to the chaos already present. And so you became that. You stopped crying when you needed to cry. You stopped asking for things because asking started to feel like it cost too much. You read the room before you could read a book. You learned to scan for mood, for tension, for the specific kind of silence that meant something was wrong and you needed to either fix it or disappear before it landed on you. You made yourself useful, or capable, or invisible. Because the situation required it, because nobody else was going to step in. And because, somewhere in the logic of a child's mind, you understood that your stability was part of what was holding things together. That was not a choice. That was survival. And here is the part that should make you stop for a second. You are still surviving the same way. In rooms that are finally safe. In relationships that no longer require it. You are still scanning, still managing, still waiting for something to need you so you know where you stand. How long have you been the capable one? Not because the situation demands it anymore, but because you never learned how to be anything else. There is a specific kind of exhaustion that no amount of sleep fixes. It is not physical tiredness. It is the exhaustion of someone who has been performing emotional management and quiet competence since before they had the language to understand what that performance was costing them. Before they could name what they were doing, before anyone ever told them it was not their job. You didn't get to be young in the way that youth is supposed to work. You skipped something essential. And the body keeps the tab long after the mind has moved on and told itself a cleaner story. What you skipped was the felt experience of being cared for without having to earn it first. Most people carry somewhere in their nervous system the knowledge that care is available. That when they fall apart, someone will come. That needing something does not make them a problem. That they are allowed to take up space even when they are not being useful. You didn't get that. What you got instead was a quiet lesson, repeated so many times and in so many ways that it eventually became belief. Your needs come second. Other people's discomfort matters more than your own. Asking is a burden. Needing is dangerous. Existing loudly is selfish. You didn't choose those beliefs. You were shaped by them through years of experience that offered no other option. And now, you are an adult living inside a hierarchy that was built for a world that no longer exists. Still putting yourself last. Still feeling guilt rise in your chest when you need something. Still more comfortable in the role of giver than receiver. Still faintly suspicious of people who want to take care of you without an obvious reason. Because underneath all of it, somewhere you haven't fully examined, is a voice that asks quietly, what do they want in return? That voice is not broken. That voice is intelligent. It protected you when you were small and had no other protection. It is just still running on code that was written for a different situation, and it has not been updated since. Think about the last time someone genuinely tried to take care of you. Not transactionally, not as an exchange, just offering something freely with no obvious catch. How did it feel? Not what did you think? What did your body do? Did something tighten? Did you deflect with humor before they could finish the gesture? Did you immediately try to reciprocate to balance the scale before you even let the care land? Did it feel wrong in a way you couldn't quite explain? That discomfort is not a coincidence. That is the proof. You were never permitted to be the one who needed things. Not really. And so receiving, actual receiving, without managing or minimizing it or rushing to return it, feels like standing in an open field with no walls. Exposed, unnatural. Like something uncomfortable is about to follow. Here is the layer underneath that. The role you played as a child, the one who held things steady, who kept calm, who managed the emotional atmosphere, it gave you something real in return. It gave you identity. It gave you a form of safety. The logic underneath it was simple, and it worked. If I am useful, I belong here. If I am capable, I cannot be abandoned. If I never need anything, I can never be too much for anyone. That logic was brilliant for a child who had no power and no other options. It is quietly doing damage to the adult who never received the chance to update it, because you became genuinely exceptional at being the capable one. You can read a room faster than most people realize. A room has a mood. You can sense what someone needs before they have the words for it. You can hold yourself together in emotional situations that fracture other people. You can manage complexity with a calm that looks like confidence and sometimes even is. These are not small things. They are real and hard-won skills. But they come with a cost that rarely gets named. They will draw a very specific kind of person to you. Not people who see you fully. People who need you. And there is a difference that matters enormously. The person who needs you sees a solution to their problem. The person who chooses you sees a person. And for a long time, maybe without realizing it, you have been more comfortable being a solution than being truly seen. Because being seen means being known, and being known means they might eventually find the parts you learned to put away. The parts that wanted things. The parts that were young and frightened and overwhelmed. The parts that had to go quiet because the situation left no room for them. You became the room for everyone else, and the question nobody ever asked was who holds the room itself. What happened to the child underneath all of that? The one who needed to fall apart sometimes and be caught. The one who had fears they couldn't name and wants they learned not to voice. That child did not disappear. They went quiet. They learned to wait. They are still there underneath the competence and the calm and the productivity and the performed certainty that everything is fine. That child is exhausted in a way that the adult has never fully let themselves admit. Here is what no one tells you about growing up too fast. The grief is almost impossible to access because the wound is invisible. There was no single event to point to. There was no clear villain. There were just years of quietly bending yourself around other people's needs until bending started to feel like your natural shape. And you cannot grieve a shape. You cannot mourn something that looks, from the outside, like strength and capability and emotional maturity. But it is a loss. It is the specific loss of a childhood that should have held you instead of leaning on you. The loss of years spent managing emotional weight that was never yours to carry. The loss of a version of yourself that got buried so early you genuinely don't know what they would have looked like given more room. That grief is real, and it does not require a dramatic story to be legitimate. And here's what that unprocessed grief quietly builds in your adult life. It builds a pattern where rest feels unearned, where stillness feels dangerous, like you are failing to justify your presence, where your nervous system cannot fully settle because settling means releasing the vigilance, and the vigilance has been the mechanism keeping you safe since you were far too young to be responsible for the emotional stability of the people around you. Why does doing nothing feel like a risk to you? Not laziness, not ingratitude. Because the child in you learned at a foundational level that worth is something you perform. That safety is something you maintain through continued usefulness. That the moment you stop being needed, the ground might shift beneath you. The ground is not shifting. But the nervous system does not update on logic alone. It updates on experience. On the slow accumulation of moments where you needed something and the world did not end. Where you rested and nothing collapsed. Where you received care and were not charged for it afterward. What changes this is not a strategy or a framework or a new habit layered over the old wiring. What changes this is something slower and far less comfortable. It is the willingness to look at what was asked of you without immediately reframing it as strength. To stop calling it resilience. To stop being quietly proud of how little you needed and how well you managed. To let it have been too much. Because it was too much. For a child, it was genuinely too much. You were not exceptional because you were built for it. You were a child with no other available option, and you carried it, and you are still carrying it. And that weight is not a character trait you need to manage better. It is something you were never supposed to be holding alone. The most capable person in the room is often the loneliest, not because they push people away, not because they don't want connection, but because they learned so early to be the one who gives that they never developed the muscle for the other direction. And real intimacy requires both. It requires the capacity to be held, not just to hold. You have been holding for a very long time. What would it mean to finally put some of it down?